know him from Mekaz Rav way back. Everybody's not your standard Mekaz Rav type at all. He's more academically inclined. He has a doctorate. He just told me he's finished writing a book about the Rebbe Lubavitch now. He's connected. I wouldn't describe him as a believer. I don't know what he believes exactly. But, he's not your typical Kabbalah or Hasidut type of person, but those fields, at least academically, intellectually interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew Rav. We spoke about Rav Steinsaltz. He knew Rav Steinsaltz quite well. In fact, we agreed on many things about Rav Steinsaltz, but he was not really. He performed an important. He took upon himself an important task. Were it not for Rav Steinsaltz's initiative, there will not be. And I think that it sells less in the world today than Schottenstein. Probably a lot less, but there would not be a Schottenstein if it wasn't for Rav Steinsaltz. There's no question about that. Rav Steinsaltz, he was the one, the Machon, who jumps into the sea, and he's also attacked for it by Rav Shach, as we know.
What do you think of the claims of Rav Shach?
Claims?
Against what Rav Steinsaltz did regarding the content.
Content?
I think at the time he...
Rav Shach's complaint? No, it's clear, I think, today that one of the things that bothered people like Rav Shach, this is not what he said as far as I know, was the fact that Rav Steinsaltz printed, this goes back to this began in the early 70s. I think the first volumes were already coming out in Tafshin Lamed, maybe even Kaftet, maybe in 69, but certainly by 71. I know this for a fact, unless I'm very much mistaken. I think my father already purchased a couple of the first volumes in Tafshin Lamed Aleph, 71. Anyway, so I'm saying his project began in the early 70s, began to make waves. It was a big chidush. No one had ever imagined or thought of such a thing before, really. You could ask why, but no one had. And it's clear why Rav Steinsaltz did, because he came from a irreligious background. He was Chozer B'Tshuva, with some connection to Chabad. I'm not sure how that came about. He studied chemistry he was academically inclined. He was a very intelligent and erudite person. And he appreciated perhaps because he himself had to go through that. He went through a baptism of fire, perhaps, when he wanted to start learning from the sources, from the Gemara, shall we say, which he hadn't learned as a youngster. So he obviously began with a huge disadvantage. And he must have felt this keenly, and that others would be in the same position. There was also a certain movement of tshuva in the world at that time. It was in the 70s that Uri Zohar was presented tshuva, just for example. And there were quite a few Israelis, from the far Bohemian left, who were tshuva at that time. But these people could never understand a word of Gemara. So the sons of made him put himself to task to change that. And that's quite amazing. But he was not Haredi, not in the normal sense, certainly not. Not saying he was a huge tziyoni exactly. I don't know how. I don't think he would even. If you asked him, I think he would have just defined himself as one or the other, either pro or anti. He was in many ways a sort of Chabadnik, which is a kind of more or less neutral position. Although, if you go back to the former Rebbe, the last Rebbe's father-in-law, he was clearly anti-Zionist, no question about that. But the last Rebbe, diluted that anti-Zionist. It wasn't Satmar at all. He was much more. That's why I think that's why he was much more active in Israeli politics. I discussed this with this person yesterday. It was in Kohen. He was here. He didn't agree with me about Rabbi Lubavitch's motivation. or being opposed to land for peace. I said it was based on the straightforward and down-to-earth halachic concept of goyim who come to attack Jews on Shabbat, and that you have to fight them on Shabbat, even if all they want is land, because of the threat that it poses to the Jewish people. And I think that's what drove the Lubavitch. He was concerned with Jewish people's safety, which is more than sufficient justification and reason. But he said it's much more involved, and I think he's written a book about it. Okay, fine. So that, I remember him from. We also taught at the same period, roughly, in Mahalat Tzvi, way back. So I know him somewhat. He lives here, which I discovered when I moved here. I didn't know he lived here. And he's interesting person. And he was here.
Do you personally have a preference when it comes to the Steinsaltz Gemara or the Schottenstein?
I can't say that I've used either of them.
Well, not that you use them personally, but in terms of
what I've seen. From what I've seen, I think the Steinsaltz's version is more compact, more concise. I think he doesn't. I don't think you find footnotes where he quotes Marsha and things of this nature. He definitely explains. He often will point out in his commentary, the Tosafot said this, or what have you. By the way, I also should tell you, I know for a fact that all of the work was not done by Rav Steinsaltz. I know this for a fact. But he began, and he laid the groundwork, and he conceived of this possibility, and I'm sure he laid out the basic guidelines and parameters. But I know that there was a kollel that was set up, and I knew a person when I was first married, for example, lived in Kiryat Moshe, and older than me, Sarah, the Israeli Talmid Chachamim, very sort of quiet, modest individual who was in the Talmid Chachamim, who was the head of this kollel. I knew him. I was meeting him in the mikveh, for example, and I remember his name offhand. And he told me that there's a bunch of people, and they learn and study the Gemara, what have you, and they come up with they're basically writing the commentary. So this, I'm talking now about the, let's say the mid-80s or something, early to mid-80s, late 80s, whatever, the 90s. That's how most of the material was done. Probably maybe at the very beginning, Rav Steinsaltz himself wrote it, and I'm sure he was the chief editor. But in practice, a lot of the commentary was not written by him. But he oversaw it and set it into motion. So it's justified to be, Nikra al Shmo. So he did that. And the Schottenstein is a little bit more Haredi in flavor, and obviously there's a little bit less, quite a lot less perhaps, attention paid to historical, archaeological issues which come up, just like explaining a name or a place name or a term, or a kind of vessel that, shall we say, the Quran mentioned, what it looked like. So Rav Steinsaltz was more eclectic and much broader in his erudition than your average Haredi, obviously. So that comes out in the Perush. but the Schottenstein could not have done, would not have begun, and could not have done what they did. They don't have Rav Steinsaltz's work before them as a kind of blueprint or an example of what might be done. And I think it came into existence. The art scroll it's called Schottenstein based because someone donated a lot of money, but it's an art scroll production, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
That's what I recall. Yes.
Yeah, I think it came into existence. I think at least one of the impetuses for its genesis was the fact that Rav Shach put Rav Steinsaltz's Gemara in Cherem. You know this.
Yes.
He actually said they have to be buried, which was rather strange, I think. But I understand why, because it wasn't actually things written in Perush and the Gemara that Rav Steinsaltz wrote that Rav Shach objected to. As I understand it, he objected to the fact that Rav Steinsaltz, who had become quite a personality in Israel at that time, he had, I think, he had recorded some lectures. It probably still exists, but I haven't heard it for many years. It was on Galei Tzahal on the radio, called Universitat Meshuderet, or something like that. You heard of such a thing?
I once heard that. Yes.
Yeah, it was usually in the evening, and you could listen to these lectures by academics on various subjects. Fine, very interesting. I used to listen to some of them, and apparently, I don't recall hearing Rav Steinsaltz, but apparently Rav Steinsaltz either he gave these such lectures or he wrote anyhow. The Universitat Meshuderet put out booklets on various subjects based on these talks. And there were some booklets like that were put out based on Steinsaltz's talks or writings about the Tanaim, about the Moraim, that sort of historical and analysis and some information and discussion of who they were and what they did, aimed at the general public, not the yeshivish public, not even the Dati public really, but anyway. And so there, Rav Steinsaltz is a little bit more open-minded in his approach. I don't know exactly what he wrote, but it wasn't yeshivish enough in style, put it that way. And that riled. Someone must have found a sentence or two that didn't like, and they showed it to Rav Shach, and Rav Shach went ballistic and put it in Cherem and commanded that in the yeshiva, this is the thing you see, in some yeshivot, Haredi institutions where they had Balei Teshuvah, people from various backgrounds, people were using either openly or surreptitiously, they were using Rav Steinsaltz's Gemara to be able to study. And they didn't like this. And initially they didn't know what to do about it because they did not have a substitute. And then Rav Shach came along and put in Bichlam and Cherem. So really that sealed it. They had no choice. They had to come up with their own version.
I recall.
I think that's what happened.
I also recall something about he didn't like how Rav Steinsaltz in certain places explained certain, I think, biblical figures, explained something about their lives that Rav Shach found objectionable, perhaps certain negative things.
There's probably something into what you say. That's probably how Rav Shach felt. I don't know exactly what Rav Steinsaltz wrote. I doubt that anything is really objective. I very much doubt.
It might have been. It could be there was references to later day post-Talmudic figures as well, and that also might have been part of the issue for Rav Shach. I don't recall at the moment.
Okay, Rav Shach, he wasn't. Apparently, it was not always so, but he became an arch conservative. And he became the head and the undisputed leader of the Thai world at that time. We're talking about the 70s and 80s. That's what I recall. His name was the name on the Haredi's lips the whole time. Even the Sfaradim who wanted to study Torah seriously at that time learned Yiddish and went to study in Lubavitch, for example, and they were coming from Rav Shach, not Rabbi Yosef.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.